Welcome to Ask the Expert on Contingent Workforce Strategies LinkedIn group, the #1 group for our industry. I have a really cool Ask the Expert today. And, we talk about it being a very important component of contingent workforce programs, but it's often not implemented well within the programs or even as a standalone, right? As part of a program of getting work done with external resources. And I have one of the most interesting, perfect people to talk on this topic, Paul Vincent. He's been in the industry for over 30 years. He's got tons of knowledge and experience from all sorts of different aspects of his career, leading teams within not only the service procurement and statement of work management arenas, but all through his career as a consultant and advisor, as a supplier, manager, procurement director on a global basis. He's got a very unique background, and with over 30 years of experience, a lot of wisdom, and has seen a lot of things done right and a lot of things done wrong. So Paul, thank you for taking the time to speak with me today, especially with your travel schedule all over the world.
No, I've been really looking forward to the session, Jeff, and it's about time we did this, isn't it, really?
It is. We've been trying to do this for a while, and we finally made our schedules work, which is perfect. So, I want to talk on the topic of statement of work and the idea of hiring work versus a worker or just the worker. Because, when you think about that as the topic, hiring work and work product versus the worker, it really changes the mindset when you start to think about statement of work as part of a contingent program, or just in general when you're working with consultants and external providers. So, when I look at it, I've seen all sorts of different ways this has been implemented, all sorts of different flavors, but, often companies get it wrong, and they often don't even get it started and off the ground when they talk about statement of work. Because when you look at external spend, there's a massive amount of external spend when you look at your statement of work and your consulting spend. And to be able to manage it holistically with your contingent program, it really starts to look at all of your external labor and the way things get done with using external means. So with your experience, you've seen things done right, things done wrong. Why are some of the reasons why just the SOW often doesn't even get off the ground when a program wants to bring it into the procurement realm?
Well, it's the golden nugget question, because you're right. I have seen things done well, and I've seen things done not so well. And I have to say that proportionally, I've seen more things done not so well than I have seen them done well. So I guess I'd call out, 3 or 4 main key reasons for that. The first is that, a program is doomed to fail if its center of gravity is I'm going to stop somebody from doing something. And you talked about you hire for the work rather than the workers. Well, how often do people say my problem is misclassification?
Yeah.
I've got this organization that is just bringing people in to circumvent my rules, and they're using statement of work as a mechanism. Well, statement of work is a contract. It's just a way of engaging for services. You can engage a cleaner, a gardener, an electrician on a statement of work. Right? So it's all about understanding what is it you're trying to achieve, and then you use the mechanism around that. The second point I would say is that there is so much more interdependency in this area than most people recognize. So, I talk a lot about there being the engagement life cycle, which is, define what you want, then you find the right supplier or person who can do that. Then you do the work, and then you're evaluating how well did they actually do what you wanted them to do and how well they gave you that value for money. But there are so many interdependencies throughout that cycle. So if I define the work poorly, how can I judge whether someone has actually delivered something of value to me or not?
Yeah.
How can I make sure when I'm going out to the market to find a supplier, I'm judging my alternatives in the right way? And how can I make sure that when I'm using sort of information to inform my future buying decisions, am I extracting the right things? So you've really got to think about the end-to-end of any solution. Even if the areas where you need someone like an MSP to help you may be more narrow, but you've got to think end-to-end in order to make that program successful.
Yeah.
The next one, sorry.
No, it's so interesting when you take the concept of thinking about what you want to achieve versus, in some cases, talking to the person first and them telling you what you want to achieve, right? And because of that, sometimes you end up getting really poor results. But when you look at it at more of the program level, it's really starting to think about it from, the overall viewpoint of an organization and not just the governance, right? It's more important. Yes, governance is important, but it's really important to understand what you're looking to achieve with a statement of work program.
And most statement of work requirements are situational.
Yeah.
They often, you have a problem, a challenge in your organization that you need someone to come in and help to diagnose or to support or to give you that perspective you need for the future. And so the idea that you can just suddenly magically define everything to the nth degree and is just unrealistic. You've also got to realize that will make a big difference to the value perceived by the SOW business owners. And that's the next thing that is a massive, massive reason why programs don't get off the ground.
Yeah.
Is that SOW business owners are never involved early enough in the solutioning discussions.
Yeah.
And you go all the way deep into the process with procurement functions who, with the best will in the world, cannot speak on behalf of the SOW business owners. And therefore, all that happens is you get past a certain point where you have to realign. And you spend a lot of time, honestly, and I can be candid on this podcast. You spend an awful lot of time thinking, why didn't we have these conversations 6 months before? Because you could plan for this. You could actually bring them with you. You're adding in just as much delay into a program, and you're making it harder for yourself because then you're trying to redress the fact they feel disenfranchised. They feel they weren't involved about something which is critical to them. So that's a real big,
Yeah, I guess setting the expectations, because often when you look at it from a procurement function, it's a shared services. They're experts in procuring things and the process versus the actual, like you say, the statement of work business owner who is the expert in delivering that project or needed that project done by a third party to do that piece of work or whatever. And so having that collaborative discussion on, hey, we're experts in the process, you're experts in needing that piece of work done. Let's talk beforehand to make sure expectations are there on what the process is going to be, what our roles are in the process, what your roles are in the process, and then what things we need to do to properly assess if this vendor community are the right ones to complete that project. Not just who was the vendor that took you to the last dinner or the last baseball game, etc. Right?
Yeah, I mean, it's all about giving a validated choice.
Yeah.
As an in-house procurement team, you want to be able to guide and advise the business owners on here are the choices you have, and here's what we can do to help you to make sure that you are baselining those choices. But at the end of the day, if I want to spend twice as much as I could do with somebody because I'm more confident in their ability to deliver and I have that budget signed off, well, that's not poor procurement from an in-house procurement standpoint. You've given that validated choice. At the end of the day, it's the decision of the person who has the budget and the need that has to take precedence. And so programs that enable that will be successful. There's a final point I would say, which is a preoccupation with savings out the gate. Right? So if you start from the premise of, on day one of a new process, I'm going to have everything so locked down that we can realize enormous savings. Again, you're being unrealistic. What you should do is say, my primary goal is participation.
Yes.
So the more spend, the more supplies we get into the program as quickly as possible, the more we get the data and the insights that we can then use to build that validated choice. And it's not saying that savings are not unimportant. Of course, they're very, very important and very realizable. But you need insight in order to say to a business owner, why don't you think about this instead of that?
Yes.
And if all you're doing is making it harder to get the program to a particular size and strength where you can have that insight, again, you're pushing value down the road, which you don't need to.
Yeah, well, and it's funny you say that. I love the idea of inclusiveness, right? And bringing people in. And some of the best programs, and these are multinational major banking institutions, they basically, when they started their program, they set up the VMS only for billing purposes, tracking milestones and billing, but then also tracking the resources within those programs so that, like you say, they got the data from the statement of work providers to say, on this project, there's 4 BAs, there's 3 developers, and there's, here's the resources. And over time, they started to track the data, and then they could make consultative suggestions to the business owners to say, maybe there's some better ways of buying, especially if the statement of work is not guaranteeing the deliverables, it's not guaranteeing the timelines and the cost structure. And so when you start to compare apples to apples, then the buyer now can use your consultative nature and the data you've collected by being more inclusive and not trying to stop the procurement process, but to enhance it. It turns out better.
You're right, except there is a big landmine in there, and it's a very simple one, but a very big one, which is that there is this presumption that visibility matters to people with the need and the budget, right? I genuinely in my career have never met, for example, a head of IT that doesn't know very, very in detail who they've got working on projects, who are internal, who are external, and how much they're paying.
Correct.
So when we talk about visibility as a challenge, we mean often the in-house procurement teams don't have the visibility. Right?
True.
And so if you're selling visibility as a benefit internally, you've got to make sure that visibility will make a positive difference to the people you're actually supporting. Otherwise, they feel like it's just, giving procurement another license to put another hurdle in their way, which again it's that mentality often isn't real, but it's how people perceive some of these programs, that they are more to stop rather than to enable.
Yeah, no, and both HR and procurement receive that kind of label as the departments of no, right? Often. And so to get rid of that label is to actually work collaboratively and enhance the program and what they're buying and the process of buying, so that they're getting the right provider to complete the program at a reasonable price, if not the best price, and in the right time, right? So it's interesting how the parallels to the contingent program are there, but it's very sophisticated, because often in the statement of work consulting practice area, you're also dealing with the large consulting houses. And those often are also potentially, when you mention landmines, they're political hot potatoes because the CTO or the head of legal or the head of HR has very close relationships with some of the larger consulting houses. Because once again, when your neck is on the line for a $75 million transformation project, you want to go to someone that you have a strong relationship with and confidence that they will deliver for you. And so, walking in and trying to disrupt those relationships is often very difficult too. And quite honestly, some of the larger vendors don't want that relationship disrupted or visibility into those relationships either. How have you seen some of those been brought in to be more programmatic and be able to assess the value?
Well, I think the first thing you've got to do is respect those relationships. They haven't just happened overnight. You've got partners in the big consulting organizations that will have built relationships over decades.
Yeah.
And so, and you have to respect those. But also, when you understand the dynamics of this world, there are many things that consulting firms do for their customers they don't do for themselves. And so, actually, if I'm doing a lot of projects in one particular customer, how good is my management information going to be about different types of projects? How well do we get to productivity in one part of the organization versus another? And cost of sale, even to those big brands, is still an important dimension. So what you do is you just flip it from, okay, how can I make sure that we're really leveraging the real strength and depth that you have as an organization inside the customer, and you're building a partnership with them that again for them it means that you're helping them to get that platform for future work, but it's got to be based on success. Now there is an adage, isn't there? You're only as good as the last project you do, right? And I think you have to sort of build that model into the program, so they're constantly learning, but you're also constantly helping them to learn, and they feel more of a partnership in there.
That's so important, right? Especially when you're dealing with partners, like you've said, of large firms or mid-sized consulting houses too, that have strong relationships with senior folks. Working with the vendors to build trust with them and making sure that they're feeling that it's going to be successful for them also brings that inclusion of them into the program, right?
Yeah.
How do you get the key stakeholders aligned? So we talked about relationships, and I love your idea of respecting the relationships that have been there and often been there for long periods of time, because it's the best way to build a more inclusive program. What are some of the best practices you've seen or you use in building a program to get all the different stakeholders aligned, be it procurement to the buyers, to senior management, to the vendor community?
Well, this might sound strange, but the first thing is actually talk to them, and then get them talking to each other, even better, and help them to see that they have a different perspective, on the engagement life cycle. And so that's one thing, which is just get that conversation going, ask them questions, be interested in what they actually want to achieve and the challenges they have, and the tension and the stress that may be surrounding them with a particular requirement. So that's the first thing. You've also got to recognize that there is going to be differences between different types of spend. So what the marketing team will need and want will be different from IT, will be different from legal, will be different from engineering. And so expect those differences and encourage those differences, but make sure you don't allow differences for their own sake. I always say that exceptions have to be exceptional. And so really try and get them to see where there's commonality, but almost freedom within a frame, if I put it something like that. We get their perspective. I think the next thing is you don't present them with a solution. You agree on solution principles. It's, if we did this, what difference would it make to you? And let's prioritize in your mind, in your area, how that could impact you. Right? And then the last thing is you've got to design every part of this conversation with them at the center of the Venn diagram. You know, how are we trying to help you to get the outcomes you need when you need them, and pay a price that represents value for money to you? But it's by understanding and just by holding up a mirror sometimes to things they don't know. I mean, how you must have seen this many times where somebody uses the same supplier for almost everything, irrespective if they have a specialism there or not, because actually they know how they work, they know how they think and ask questions, and that actually has a value in the equation. So you need to, these are real things, so you need to make sure they have a place in the program structure.
Yeah, it's interesting how when you look at the vendor community as a stakeholder and you engage with them and understand their requirements in terms of, you know, delivering more successfully, but also their stresses of around profitability, resourcing, all of these things that often is, you know, underneath a glossy presentation, right, and proposal, that if you can get below the glossiness of it and understand them as the organization or the partner who's running the project, understanding these components, you can then collaborate and find a balance between your needs and theirs that is mutually beneficial, and you can move it forward, right?
Well, one of the examples I've used a few times in sort of coaching and training purposes is, imagine you are in charge of a customer complaint team, and your complaint handling performance has got a lot worse in the last 6 months. And you need a pretty straightforward SOW type project, which is come in, assess, do some root cause analysis, recommend a solution, and maybe help to implement that solution. Imagine you're deciding who is right for you if you've just taken over that team. You're going to want everything exposed, right? You want to know the depth and breadth of the disaster you've inherited, so that actually you don't get tied to any of that pre-existing challenge. And you're going to want a supplier who will actually support you on that. Now imagine you've been in charge of that team for 3 years, right? All of a sudden, you're potentially going to be held accountable for that. So the last thing you want is all of that then magnified. And so you want to choose someone who's going to be perhaps a little bit more mindful about the impact on you. Well, those nuances need to be really understood in the buying decision, but you wouldn't write that into an RFP, would you?
No. And those nuances and those conversations that you would have builds trust between all parties. And so, you know, with all of your experience and now leading the statement of work practice at Randstad, like, you've ebbed and flowed. How are you doing things differently now than you would have done a few years ago, or what you're seeing other organizations do in managing statement of work in this space?
So I think the biggest lesson is probably a number of years ago, you would have started from, you know, what do you want this to encompass? What do you want this program to include? And often people don't know, you know, and so you get locked in this cycle of, well, I need to do something differently to what I do today, but I'm not quite sure what that needs to look like. And so very intentionally, we've created a whole suite of best practice workflows. So we can actually say, right, well, here across the life cycle, here is what good looks like for you to ensure you're getting value for money. And it starts off when the need is identified, then it finishes when you're evaluating that final step, and you're taking that into more of a bigger, bigger buying environment. You've got to be able to adapt and roll that around the parameters of the client. So they will have different policies, they'll have different ways of doing things, and where they have established, I mean, let's use an example, preferred supplier list. If they have a particular established way of doing that, you weave that into the program structure. If they don't, then you say, well, here's our suggested practices for how to do it. So you make it really totally malleable. And then the third step is you have everything, or as much as possible, prefabricated.
Yeah.
So you can really hit the ground running, because that change is not easy, but it's a lot easier if you can say, here is what you're going to get as part of the solution. But I can't underscore how important change management is. I mean, we've just finished implementing a very broad program for a large pharma client. And one of the really big success ingredients was there was a 2-in-a-box change manager. So we had someone to manage a change from our perspective. They had a counterpart within the client organization, and they worked supremely well together to just make sure you're ironing out the kinks and the wrinkles inside the organization. And that's absolutely kind of critical.
Yeah, and change management is so essential, and communication of change, so that people have their expectations set as they get into the meetings and understandings of things, so that they're coming in not with kind of an adversarial approach. It's, hey, they're here to help, and they're giving us some, understanding of what's going to be happening as we move through this process. And I love how you've simplified a lot of your sayings. Like, one of the most joyous things I find is make it simple, right? And so things like exceptions need to be exceptional, like simple things that I can see you've earned and learned over the years that actually guide people, right? And set proper expectations. So it's a simple rule that, is a nice way to say it, but it also sets right expectations. So, we could talk for hours and hours, Paul. This is fascinating. I love all of the things that you've brought to the table that really have taught us and differentiated and said, hey, statement of work is more than just, hiring a person, or, hiring service and being very transactional in its approach. It's more nuanced. There's so many nuances to it that really hiring experts for this is important. But if I try to whittle this back down, and I always try to end with, hey, I'm just a contingent workforce program lead, that I know I need to start to manage statement of work within the program. So I know the word visibility is sometimes, overused, but it is often to gain visibility, because I know there's a lot of staff aug being pushed in the statement of work bucket, or vice versa. Statement of work consulting program vendors are taking advantage of their statement of work, and they're pushing in staff aug roles at much higher margins. And so I want to bring this under the realm, but I know there's all these nuances and it's sophisticated. What are some of the first steps that I should think about and be aware of in order to just start down that journey of managing both sides of both statement of work, hiring work, as well as, bringing it into the realm of where I typically work, is hiring the workers?
Yeah. So I think just starting, is probably a good first step. I always intrigued by someone who will say to me, "Oh, we're just not ready for it yet," and they'll say, "And we've got complete, chaos, complete immature." It's like, well, what are you waiting for then? Because how will you ever get ready if you don't make a start? So you're always you're where you are. Your starting point is wherever you are. So you're never going to have all the data you would want. You're never going to have all the relationship you would want. Suppliers are never going to be able to do everything you'd want them to do. So actually, it's just saying, well, how do I build a pathway that's going to start getting me into the realm of trying to do something differently for my business. That's the first thing, acknowledgement. The second thing is be very careful about what you set as the goal. Okay? Now, the goal isn't to put restrictions internally, because they'll be rejected, a tissue rejection. And so you've got to be sure, okay, here's how I can identify things that my business will actually see benefit in. And then also think about things which are not just transactional related. So, if I can increase the speed of productivity of these types of resources, will that make a big difference to their impact on my organization?
Yeah.
So if I think about organizational process, organizational goals, not just procurement process or sort of policy goals, then I'm going to start with that right intent. And then find a partner who you can work alongside and co-create with. The best solutions are co-created. They're not here. I mean, I've been doing this for many years, but I don't have a bucket of magic dust in my pocket, right? And so it's, how do I work with you to help you through your thinking, that help you to kind of set the pathway to success, and be, final point I say, be realistic about your current state and transparent about it, because there's no current state I haven't seen before.
Yeah. Well, honesty, authenticity, and giving the truth allows your external partners and your internal stakeholders to understand where you're at, and setting proper expectations on what you're looking to achieve also allows for that. And hopefully you've gained each other's trust and move forward in the right direction, right? So, Paul, I can't say enough thank yous to you for taking the time. I know you're traveling, and it's always awesome to catch up with you. And it's just amazing what you've shared today, and look forward to more discussions.
Absolutely. Well, it's great that we finally managed to make it happen.